the CEO of Ibec, Danny McCoy.
Thank you very much, Kieran. Good afternoon, everybody. May I start with addressing the topic of the day, stakeholders and sustainability, and thank all the participants in particular for the stimulating and thought-provoking insights that they provided on the topic. We were very fortunate today to have some wonderful guest speakers, which were really stimulating and insightful, and also fortunate in having a great set of sponsors. So my thanks to Accenture, Aon, Merck Partners, Spencer Stewart, and McCann Fitzgerald. But thank you also, our delegates, for joining us today. The economy continues to be on a twin track. The strong performance of our foreign direct investment and export-orientated businesses continues to be a marvel. Economic activity for 2020, which will long be remembered as the year of COVID, shows that the Irish economy in GDP terms has grown as much as 4% in volume. Remarkable as this is, in contrast to most other countries, it's a tale of two economies within Ireland. The outward-facing economy was undisrupted in many ways by the global pandemic because of the nature of the products and services that are provided for in the global hub that is Ireland. These sectors are biopharma, medtech, food and drink. But then in the domestic-focused economy, we see a different story. We see those who are consumer-facing or congregation settings-based industries being incredibly disrupted. There is evidence in this is evident in sectors ranging from aviation to hospitality to retail. But even within some of those categories, the innovation of businesses to find new ways of reaching their customers has been a revelation, but also should be a source of inspiration and confidence that once we get through the pandemic in the coming months, and as the vaccination starts to provide light at the end of the tunnel, we will see the economy snap back significantly. We can be confident this domestic snapback because of the savings that are now within Irish households, which have grown by over €3 billion during 2020 alone. Due to the suppression of outlets for spending is one factor there, but incomes have also been maintained, as Ireland remains a high-income generating business model. The other feature of the economy has been the disruption in terms of the way we do business. The future of work, a topic which Ibec has considered in our Smarter World, Smarter Work campaign, has suddenly pivoted to a more blended and remote working environment. This trend in parts will stick, but we will also see a return to the office environment. Indeed, it's important right now that we have a roadmap as to how we're going to get back to an office-based economy in a safe and sustainable way. And that leads me to the topic of today's conference. Stakeholder capitalism, as it's now called, and sustainability go hand in glove. However, it must be acknowledged that the first step on either dimension is for the business model to resume some form of normality, a requirement to go back in order to move forward. This is to ensure that the resources are generated to allow the stakeholders make decisions that underpin a fairer, more sustainable business model, and in turn, the natural environment, and by extension, a more sustainable society. When business looks to its shareholders as opposed to the narrow prism of just a shareholder, we recognize the wider community and society. As business leaders, we have stakeholders as customers, suppliers, but crucially, our colleagues and employees are stakeholders too. It is this employee dimension that we are observing one of the great trends and that existed even before COVID, this pendulum swing towards collectivism. Collectivism is a reaction to the period of individualism that extended over 4 decades across the Western world. The financial crisis of a decade ago was a catalyst for revising some of the more extreme aspects of individualism that ultimately gave rise to many now referred to as precariousness. Precariousness in terms of job prospects, in terms of pensions, retirement prospects, and health benefits. All of these issues are in the context of such uncertainty have given rise to a frustration with the global business model. The term stakeholder capitalism is emerging from entities we heard today, like the US Business Roundtable, that has led in the proclamation of the replacement of the shareholder value with stakeholder value as a predominant business imperative. The stakeholder value I would like to focus on today is collectivism in the workplace. The Biden administration is very firmly in its initial 100 days citing collective bargaining rights and trade union recognition as forming part of the conversation in the United States in a way that hasn't been seen since the 1970s. In the European Union, we see the stakeholder referred to as part of the EU social partner model of collective bargaining rights on issues like minimum wages, as recently proposed by the European Commission. Brexit has also given rise to issues around employment laws, and indeed collective negotiations within the United Kingdom. Potential changes in the collective rights of UK workers will give rise to level playing field concerns with the EU. A potential race to the bottom on employment standards and withdrawal of collective bargaining rights established under the European Union may well become a source of tension. Domestically, the general election of last year saw the manifestos of most of the now opposition parties include a constitutional referendum proposal to make collective bargaining a constitutional right here in Ireland. The operation of some of the established industrial relations practices, and particularly collective agreements under sector employment orders, have come under a constitutional challenge in the last year, with a decision expected from the Supreme Court in the case of the electrical contractors. All of these trends were observable in Ireland in recent years, when collectivism, traditionally of a left-wing hue, has been challenged by emerging forces of the right wing. Right-wing collectivism in various disputes have been apparent, but no more so than the eastern borders of the European Union, where countries are lurching towards right-wing collective movements. So with business leaders professing a desire to move to stakeholder values in all its guises, collective agreements with employees will be a particularly significant one here in Ireland. As part of the programme for government, the coalition parties have established a social dialogue model under the remit of the Labour Employer Economic Forum. Ibec is the lead business organisation in that forum, with the Irish Congress of Trade Unions. It is chaired by An Taoiseach, with the wider cabinet also attending. Among the features of LEAF is discussions on statutory sick pay, remote working, right to disconnect, and other issues. However, increasingly, the issue of how to determine the terms and conditions of employment and that wage entitlements, the pensions or leave arrangements, is increasingly seeking a forum that can best be described as one of delivering collective agreements. The Taoiseach, in his role as Minister for Enterprise, has asked the LEAF to set up a study on how collectively bargaining rights can be developed that is consistent with Irish businesses' competitiveness, harness the dynamism in our labour market. This is going to be a challenge which Ibec will engage in over the next year, but is very firmly seen under the spectrum of stakeholder engagement. The stakeholders must also be considered as a cross-jurisdictional context for this shared island of ours. All business leaders will need to be sensitive to the post-Brexit world and the Northern Ireland Protocol in particular, where the dimensions of stakeholders right across the island need to be factored into business considerations. It is far too short-sighted to think that jurisdictional borders of the island will determine the spillover on some of the great challenges of our time. Equity in the functioning of the labour market is significant, but so too is the sustainability of our natural environment. The sustainability debate that we had today is one that Ibec has shown significant work on over the last 2 years. In 2019, we published a low carbon roadmap, with Ireland and the EU now both targeting climate neutrality by 2050. We must build a roadmap and work with stakeholders right across society to meet the goal in the smartest possible and cost-effective way. The European Union has upped the ante. The ambition for a 55% reduction in carbon emissions on 1990 levels by the year 2030 is really significant. The costs involved will be non-linear in that they will increase very significantly for greater percentage reductions. But so too, potentially, will the benefits of this transition be for the European Union being a world leader. Again, the overlapping of sustainability and the stakeholder agenda is clear for the labour market in the context of the natural environment. The so-called just transition for dislocated workers arising from these environmental changes. Sectors that will be disrupted by sustainable development initiatives will need to transition to new opportunities that a greening of our economy can bring about. Sustainable development is something that I personally have spent 30 years thinking about and writing about. My first foray actually was in 1990, the now base year for the emission reduction targets. That was the run-up to the Earth Summit in 1992 in Rio, which was the second Earth Summit from the United Nations. The first one having been in Stockholm in 1972, when incidentally, the worry then was the Earth was cooling. By 1992, clearly the Earth was warming, and the agenda has been reinforced since by subsequent events of that 30-year period. Whether we go for mitigation or adaptation is a topic I think will continue to seize our minds for some time to come. But the emergence of the climate crisis, I believe, has seized the vast majority of business leaders at this point. Discussion of what form of sustainable development will still have to be articulated. One form referred to by ecologists is a weak form. This weak form of sustainable development is where natural resources and their utilization, such as burning of exhaustible resources like coal, can be compensated for by an increase in other capitals in society, be they financial capital, human or social capital. By human capital, we're talking about the education and training. The social capital refers to the networks and equality agenda. And the stakeholder agenda is much more broadly defined in this weak form. Finance capital, as we've just heard, in terms of sustainability, must underpin the living standards of a society to be inclusive of stakeholders and also to mediate sustainability. The weak form of the so-called weak form of sustainable development looks to trade-offs that occur in the utilization of these natural resources in a sustainable way by facilitating the enhancement of the other forms of capital. A strong form of sustainable development views natural capital as never being compensatable by the other forms of capital. This is an extreme form of sustainable development, which I believe our societies will not embrace in the short term, though many are loose in their language and terminology. Therefore, the trade-offs involved in what might be called this weak form of sustainable development will require valuation techniques with greater empirical evidence on what these trade-offs involve. These trade-off valuations can best be mediated through a social dialogue structure, which will help both the stakeholder and the sustainability agendas simultaneously. And the good news is that we in Ireland are moving towards that social dialogue model once again, in a way in its modern form. So to be explicit, social dialogue is not a social partnership of old. Social partnership of old was about centralized wage bargaining, tax cutting, and underpinned by industrial peace. It provided the opportunity for individuals to stay in Ireland or return to Ireland, reversing the trend of emigration that was unsustainably existed generation after generation. Having a stable environment for stakeholders or providing a stake in our society should not be assumed to be inevitable. It is the business model that has allowed people to have a stake in our society and to stay here if they want, to build a family, to build a career, to build a future. Social dialogue will facilitate the mediation of these trade-offs, be they in the sharing of the island, the just transition from environmental changes, or the stakeholder agenda in terms of how the labour market operates and how pay bargains ultimately get determined. Therefore, when we look at bringing sustainability and stakeholder capitalism into the Irish context, we now have the institutions and the structures to do this. We need to embrace them. We need to acknowledge them. We need to underpin them. But that's the future operationalizing of this stakeholder and sustainability agenda here in Ireland. Ireland and Ibec is a frontier on these issues. Ibec in particular, through our campaigns, the model of substance, better lives, better business, smarter world, smarter work, and more recent COVID-related reboot and reimagine, addressed these topics and put in place the required structures well in advance of this crisis. Now is the time to operationalize. Now is the time for business leaders to come behind this agenda. Today, I think, will be seen as a point of inflection. We have an opportunity post-COVID, post-Brexit, to identify what the future will look like. The future beyond will be all around stakeholder capitalism and sustainability. And that's why I'm delighted that you could join us here today as that journey begins to a better sustainable future for all. Thank you. Over to you, Karen.
Thank you very much, Danny. And listen, let me just echo some of Danny's remarks and thank everybody. Thank the speakers today. Thank to all our contributors. Thanks to our sponsors, again, to Accenture, to Aon, McCann Fitzgerald, and to Merck Partners, Spencer Stewart, and to our media partners, the Irish Times. The most important thanks goes, though, to everybody in attendance and for all of your engagement today. Some great questions came through right throughout the day. There's been some great engagement in the networking chat rooms. Those chat rooms are going to be open. They'll stay open for another 20 minutes or a half hour. And many of our speakers are still available. If there are questions that you submitted and I didn't get to them, or there's other questions that have struck you listening to Danny, you can ask those questions of our speakers, like I said, in those chat rooms. And while you're navigating around that area, you'll notice a tab on your screen that says survey, and we would ask as many of you as possible to click on that and fill out the survey. It'll only take a few short minutes, but it makes a big difference and a big help to us in terms of organizing events like this into the future. So once again, thank you all for your virtual attendance and stay safe.